A legendary comeback turned into a full-blown political scandal within hours, and now the credibility of the entire World Cup hangs in the balance. Football gave the world a miracle, and then the fallout hit like a freight train. On the night of July 7th, 2026, inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Argentina pulled off one of the wildest escapes in World Cup history. Down 2 goals with time running out, the defending champions scored 3 times in barely 15 minutes, with Enzo Fernandez burying a header in the 93rd minute to seal a 3-2 win over Egypt. For millions watching around the world, it felt like a lesson in nerve, pressure, and survival. The kind of finish that looks almost too dramatic to be real. But before a full day had even passed, the mood around that result started to shift. While fans were still coming down from the madness on the pitch, a very different storm was building on the other side of the Atlantic. Egypt's players and coaching staff walked off the field convinced they had been robbed, and it did not take long for that anger to turn into something far bigger than a locker room complaint. Egypt had arrived in the round of 16 as heavy underdogs, treated by most pundits as little more than a speed bump for Lionel Scaloni's star-studded side. 15 minutes into the match, that script flipped completely. Yasser Ibrahim rose above the Argentine backline and buried a powerful header, silencing the stadium and stunning the favorites. Argentina looked rattled from the opening whistle, nowhere near the composure that carried them to the trophy 4 years earlier. Then, things got worse for the South Americans. Argentina were awarded a first-half penalty that looked like the perfect chance for Lionel Messi to level the score. Instead, Egyptian goalkeeper Mostafa Shobeir guessed correctly and produced a massive save, denying one of the greatest players in the sport at the exact moment his team needed him most. It was Messi's second missed penalty of the tournament, and the stadium fell into stunned silence. When Mustafa Zico calmly finished a second goal in the 67th minute, the upset no longer felt possible. It felt like it was already happening. Egypt's coaching staff and players say the officiating turned against them right when the result was hanging in the balance. A goal that would have put Egypt 3 ahead was ruled out after a foul review. A penalty appeal following contact between Mohamed Salah and Argentine defender Julian Alvarez was waved away, and several other challenges inside the box went unpunished as Argentina piled on 3 goals in quick succession, one of them coming with a foul in the build-up that critics say should have stopped the play. In the chaos after the final whistle, 5 Egyptian players were shown yellow cards during stoppage time, including goalkeeper Mostafa Shobeir and midfielders Hamdi Fathi and Marwan Atia, as protests erupted on the pitch. Egypt's head coach, Hossam Hassan, did not hold back afterward. He said his players had been the victims of an injustice, described the officiating as unfair, and suggested that FIFA wanted Lionel Messi to keep advancing in a tournament being played partly on Argentine soil in terms of fan support, given Messi's massive following since his move to Inter Miami. He argued that pressure had clearly been placed on the referee and that the outcome had effectively been decided before a ball was even kicked. Those comments spread fast, turning a single controversial match into the center of a much larger argument about fairness inside the world's biggest sporting event. The following day, the Egyptian Football Federation escalated things further. Federation President Hani Abu Rida filed a formal complaint with FIFA demanding an investigation into French referee François Letexier and the entire video review team, accusing them of, in his words, blatant errors and double standards that cost Egypt the match and its place in the tournament. The Federation specifically pushed back against the decision not to review certain replays that it believes would have confirmed a legitimate Egyptian goal and a clear penalty. Abu Rida went as far as calling for the referee and his crew to be removed from the World Cup entirely once the review is complete. FIFA's response came through Pierluigi Collina, the head of the organization's refereeing department and a legendary former official himself. Collina defended his team publicly, saying that debate over refereeing decisions is a normal part of football, but that unfounded accusations questioning the integrity of match officials have no place in the sport. He warned that this kind of criticism could put real threats on referees and their families. According to Collina, The video review system correctly identified a foul by Marwan Adia on Lisandro Martinez during the build-up to Egypt's disallowed goal, and both the referee and the video team judged the contact between Salah and Alvarez in the penalty area to be normal, incidental contact rather than a foul. He insisted that no one, not even FIFA's own president, has any influence over how referees make their calls during matches. That defense did little to calm things down because the argument had already grown far beyond one match. Just 2 days before the final whistle in Atlanta, a completely different controversy involving the United States national team had already put FIFA's independence under a microscope, and the two stories quickly merged into one much bigger narrative about power, politics, and fairness at this World Cup. Here is what actually happened. In the days before the Argentina-Egypt match, United States striker Folarin Balogun was given a red card during a group stage game after a challenge that injured an opposing player, triggering an automatic one-match suspension under FIFA's disciplinary rules. That meant Balogun would miss the country's massive round of 16 matchup against Belgium. According to multiple reports, President Donald Trump personally called FIFA President Gianni Infantino to ask for a review of the decision, arguing that he did not believe the incident deserved a red card. Just 1 day before kickoff, FIFA reversed the suspension and cleared Balogun to play, an outcome so rare that it marked only the second time since 1962 that a player sent off during a World Cup match was allowed back onto the field for the very next game. Trump later confirmed the call publicly, saying he asked for a review because he did not think the challenge was a foul, while insisting that he never told FIFA what to do and cannot tell them what to do. Infantino, for his part, said he told the president that FIFA's disciplinary body operates independently. Still, the timing left an impression that was almost impossible to shake, especially once reports surfaced that senior Trump administration officials, including a cabinet secretary and the head of the White House's World Cup task force, had consulted lawyers to help the United States Soccer Federation challenge the ban, despite FIFA rules that normally do not allow such appeals at all. That single phone call reopened a wound that had already been festering since the winter of 2025. Back in December of that year, at the official World Cup draw held at the Kennedy Center in Washington, Infantino introduced FIFA's first ever Peace Prize and handed the inaugural award, a large gold trophy, directly to President Trump, while officials from co-host nations Mexico and Canada looked on. Video from the ceremony showed Infantino praising Trump from the stage, saying the American president was exactly the kind of leader football needed. Days later, Infantino posted an Instagram video from Trump's inauguration that many observers read as an open show of political support. Human rights organization Fair Square filed a formal ethics complaint almost immediately, arguing that the ceremony violated Article 15 of FIFA's own code of ethics, a rule specifically designed to stop top officials from using their position to promote political leaders or political agendas. At the time, only the Norwegian Football Federation, led by outspoken President Lisa Klaveness, was willing to publicly back the complaint. Fair Square has since said it plans to escalate the matter further by filing an additional complaint with the International Olympic Committee over what it describes as Infantino's continued violations of political neutrality rules. By early July of this year, that complaint had gathered serious institutional weight. 50 members of the European Parliament from 13 different countries signed a letter dated June 29th demanding that FIFA's Ethics Committee investigate whether the decision to create the Peace Prize and to award it specifically to Trump was made unilaterally by Infantino himself rather than through FIFA's council. Then, after the Balogun reversal, the pressure jumped again. 72 members of the European Parliament sent a second, sharper letter to the football federations of all 27 European Union member states, this time explicitly demanding an investigation into whether outside political pressure from the United States government had influenced FIFA's decision-making process during an active World Cup. The lawmakers framed this as far more than a reaction to one disputed red card. Their letter argues that FIFA's code of ethics requires the president and senior officials to maintain political neutrality, commercial transparency, and integrity of competition, and that recent events raise serious doubts about whether those standards are being upheld at the very top of the organization. They are calling on national federations, who are themselves FIFA members with a formal role in enforcing accountability, to join the push for a full investigation into Infantino's relationship with the American president and its possible effects on how the tournament is being run. Observers have noted that the scale of this political pressure has not been matched since 2015, when the European Parliament called for then-President Sepp Blatter to resign at the height of the corruption scandal that reshaped FIFA's leadership. That comparison alone signals how seriously European institutions are treating the current situation, even if the accusations this time center on political entanglement rather than direct bribery. The criticism does not stop with politics. Lawmakers and advocacy groups have also pointed to FIFA's expanding web of commercial partnerships with state-linked entities. There's also a financial backdrop lawmakers keep returning to. FIFA's partnership with Saudi Arabia's state oil giant, reported as one of the largest sponsorship deals in sports history, arrived around the same time Saudi Arabia was confirmed as host of the 2034 World Cup without a competitive bidding process. Critics argue that FIFA's growing financial dependence on state-linked sponsors makes it structurally harder for the organization to hold any government, including the current American administration, fully accountable when disputes like the Balogun case arise. FIFA has defended these deals as standard sponsorship arrangements unrelated to politics. FIFA's public posture has shifted noticeably since these letters went public. Infantino, usually eager to defend himself and the organization in bold public statements, has largely stayed out of view since the most recent wave of criticism broke. That silence is notable given FIFA's long history of aggressively guarding its independence, often threatening to suspend national federations whenever governments are seen as interfering in football matters. But taking that same hard line against the biggest football powers in Western Europe would be an entirely different and far riskier fight, one that could split the sport's power structure at the worst possible moment, in the middle of the very tournament FIFA is trying to protect. Reaction across Africa has been especially sharp. In Cairo, many see the Atlanta result as more proof of a system that keeps pushing certain nations toward the exit while protecting the sport's most commercially valuable stars and matchups. Egyptian officials have been cautious about using the word corruption directly, wary of the legal risk that comes with such an accusation against the sport's global governing body, but the underlying message from the federation's formal complaint is impossible to miss. There is a growing belief across the region that broadcast revenue, sponsorship interests, and the commercial value of keeping global superstars in the tournament longer are carrying more weight than fans are told. It is worth being clear about what is confirmed and what remains contested. It is confirmed that Trump called Infantino about the Balogun suspension, that FIFA reversed the ban a day later, that Infantino gave Trump the Peace Prize in December, that Fair Square filed its ethics complaint, and that dozens of European lawmakers have now formally demanded investigations into both matters. It is also confirmed that Egypt's federation has lodged an official complaint against the referee and video team from the Argentina match, and that FIFA's Colina has publicly defended those officials as independent and free of outside influence. What remains unproven and should be treated as accusation rather than fact is any claim that the outcome of the Argentina-Egypt match was predetermined, or that Infantino personally intervened in refereeing decisions during that specific game. Those claims are being raised as serious allegations by critics, coaches, and now lawmakers. But FIFA has firmly denied any such interference, and no independent investigation has yet confirmed them. What is certain is that this World Cup, hosted for the first time across the United States, Mexico, and Canada, is now dealing with two parallel storms at once. A disputed match result that has enraged an entire nation's football federation, and a political entanglement between the leader of global football and the president of the host nation that lawmakers across an entire continent are demanding be investigated. Argentina has since advanced to face Switzerland in the quarterfinals, carrying both the weight of their dramatic comeback and the shadow of everything that followed it. The image of a clean, neutral World Cup has clearly taken a hit, and the question now facing FIFA is whether it can restore confidence in its own process while the tournament it governs is still being played. For a competition built on the idea that anything can happen on the field, the biggest uncertainty right now is happening far away from it, inside boardrooms in Zurich and parliamentary offices in Brussels, where the fight over who really controls the world's game is only just getting started. To understand how deep this rift has become, it helps to look at how fans and former players have reacted online since the letters went public. Clips of the disputed penalty appeal and the disallowed Egyptian goal have circulated widely, with former professionals weighing in on both sides. Some argue that television replays clearly show contact that should have been punished, while others insist that referees made reasonable calls under enormous pressure in a knockout match. That split in opinion mirrors the larger divide now playing out at the institutional level, where some see genuine bias and others see a normal, if painful, night of contentious officiating being blown into a geopolitical crisis. Former players from both nations have weighed in publicly. Some ex-Argentine internationals have dismissed the entire controversy as sour grapes from a team that came up short, pointing out that video review overturned calls in both directions throughout the match, not just in Argentina's favor. On the other side, former Egyptian and broader African players have argued that this fits a longer pattern they have watched for years, where teams from outside Europe and South America rarely get the benefit of close calls in must-win moments against the sport's biggest commercial draws. Neither side has offered hard proof beyond the disputed replays themselves, which is exactly why the argument has escalated into calls for a formal investigation rather than being settled by fans arguing on social media. The Balogun situation has added its own complicated wrinkle to the American side of this story. Because the reversal was so unusual, some legal analysts covering FIFA's disciplinary code have pointed out that the organization's own rules technically do not allow players to appeal red cards during a tournament at all, which is precisely why the decision surprised so many people inside the sport. FIFA has not published a detailed explanation for the change beyond a brief reference to an internal disciplinary provision. And that lack of transparency has become almost as big a talking point as the original phone call itself. Critics argue that if the rules can bend for the tournament's most powerful host nation, fans in every other country now have a legitimate reason to ask whether their own disputed calls would ever get the same treatment. Meanwhile, the political dimension of this story keeps expanding beyond the Balogun case and the Peace Prize ceremony. Members of the European Parliament involved in drafting the recent letters have pointed to a broader worry that international sport is increasingly becoming a stage for heads of state to build personal and diplomatic capital, rather than a neutral competition governed strictly by sporting merit. They note that FIFA's own governance documents were written specifically to prevent this kind of overlap, with the Code of Ethics explicitly barring officials from using their positions to promote individual political figures or agendas. Lawmakers argue that both the Peace Prize ceremony and the Balogun reversal, taken together, represent exactly the kind of behavior those rules were designed to stop. Fair Square's director has said publicly that the organization sees this moment as a test of whether FIFA's ethics framework has any real teeth at all, or whether it functions only as a public relations tool that gets invoked when convenient and ignored when the parties involved are powerful enough. The group's decision to escalate its complaint to the International Olympic Committee reflects a strategic bet that outside pressure from a separate global sporting body might succeed, where internal FIFA channels have so far failed to produce any visible action. Back on the pitch, the controversy has not stopped this World Cup from delivering some of the most talked about football in years. Argentina's comeback against Egypt is already being discussed as one of the most dramatic knockout stage moments in the tournament's history. That is precisely what makes this moment uncomfortable for neutral supporters, since a match that should be remembered purely for its drama is now permanently tied to a debate about fairness that has nothing to do with what either team did on the field. For Egypt, the elimination closes out a tournament run that had generated real excitement across the African continent, with fans hoping their team could pull off the kind of deep run that has eluded most African nations at recent World Cups. The Federation's formal complaint keeps that story alive for now, and FIFA has said it will review the claims through its standard disciplinary channels, though no timeline for a decision has been announced publicly. For Argentina, the road continues against Switzerland in the quarterfinals, with Scaloni's side still chasing back-to-back titles after their triumph 4 years ago. Messi, at 39 years old and playing in what many assume will be his final World Cup, remains the emotional center of the team's run, and that storyline is exactly what critics argue gives FIFA every commercial incentive to want Argentina, and Messi specifically, to keep advancing as deep as possible in a tournament being played on American soil, where Messi's popularity following his move to Inter Miami has been credited with boosting domestic interest in the sport. None of that commercial incentive on its own proves that any match outcome was manipulated, and it is important to be careful about that distinction. What the European Parliament's letters actually demand is not a ruling on guilt, but a formal, transparent investigation into whether FIFA's leadership has maintained the neutrality its own rules require. Whether that investigation happens and what it ultimately finds will likely shape how this World Cup is remembered long after the final whistle blows, with both storylines, unforgettable drama on the field, and a political fight over power and influence off it, running in parallel until the final is played later this month.